Amen. Thanks, Ajin. And as usual, we have translation available for you in Portuguese, Russian, and Polish. So if you're joining us online, just check the group chat to find the links. And if you're out here in the hall, just grab one of the headphones next to you. Well, there's a song from the 80s. You probably know it's called I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. And the lyrics talk about trying to do all of these amazing things in life, but still feeling like something is missing at the end of the day. And it's a great song because it gets to the heart of our human condition, right? We climb the highest mountains, we try to get success, we chase all of the things that the world has to offer, but in the end, we still don't find what we're looking for. We think, oh, only if I had this car, or only if I was in love, or only if I had this, or only if I had that, then I would be happy. But then we get that thing, or we have that experience, and in the end, we still don't feel satisfied. In the end, we still haven't found what we're looking for. And the Bible says there's a reason for that. The Bible says we have a need that none of these things the world that has to offer can fill. It says we have this spiritual need that only God alone can fill. So we can climb the highest mountains, we can have these amazing experiences, and those are all good. But in the end, we will always feel unsatisfied until we seek the Lord, the only one who fills that need. You know, maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're here out in the hall, or maybe you're watching online, and maybe you don't know why you're here, or maybe you don't know why you are watching. But you know for sure that you're looking for something that you haven't found yet, something that you know you need. You've tried everything the world has to offer, and yet you still say, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Well, this morning, as we have our first Sunday in December, as we get closer and closer to celebrating the birth of Christ, I want to pause our sermon series on the fruits of the Spirit for a couple weeks, and I want us to consider the people that are in the nativity scene. Now, if you don't know what a nativity scene is, usually they come out around this time, around Christmas. And it's those little figurines. You usually have some, manger, some farm. You have some animals, and then you have some people. And always at the center of the nativity scene is Jesus as a baby. You see Mary and Joseph, and we'll look at them in a couple of weeks. But I also want us to consider some other people that we see at the nativity scene. This morning, I would like for us to consider the wise men, the travelers from the east. According to the Bible, they were definitely looking for something. But the interesting thing that we see from the story is that when they found it, that wasn't the end of the story either. It was actually just the beginning. So if you have a Bible, please turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. Now, many times when we think about the events of Matthew chapter 2, we tend to think of them happening, right after the time of Jesus' birth, or maybe even the same time as Jesus' birth. This is what we see in a standard nativity scene, right? We see the baby Jesus, we see the wise men, the camels, and everything. But we know that Matthew chapter 2 didn't happen right after Matthew chapter 1. In fact, there was probably at least 1 year, maybe even 2 years, between the events of Matthew chapter 1, where Jesus was born, and Matthew chapter 2, which is not normally how we think about this happening, which is why our view of the nativity scene is a little distorted. So look with me at Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, which takes place a long time after Matthew chapter 1. It says, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who had been born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. So we know that Jesus was born in a small town in Israel called Bethlehem, which was about 10 kilometers south of the city of Jerusalem. Bethlehem was a really small town. It probably had less than 1,000 inhabitants at the time. And you remember that during this time, Israel is living under the occupation of the Roman Empire. So they're able to enjoy some aspects of their culture, but they are still under the rule of the Romans. So in verse 1, we see that King Herod, who is a ruthless and cruel ruler of his people, was ruling over Israel. He was famous for even doing such terrible things as murdering his own wife, murdering his own children, as well as other relatives. We see at the end of his life, he became more and more paranoid. So we have King Herod, and we have Jesus. But then we also meet these wise men from the east, who we also call the Magi. They likely came from somewhere in the east, maybe somewhere like Persia or Babylon. And we know that they were very knowledgeable about astrology and religion. And it's possible that they traveled over 1,200 kilometers to see this king of the Jews. Now, normally when we talk about the wise men, we say that there were 3 of them, but there's really no evidence that there were only 3 wise men. And in fact, there were probably a lot more because they had to travel such a long distance. They needed a lot of supplies. So there was probably more than 3, most likely. The reason we typically say that there were 3 is because we see them give Jesus 3 gifts. And these men say that they have come because they have seen a star. Now, there's various theories about this star. Some say it could have been a comet or a supernova. Others say it was a supernatural star that God used to guide them there. We're not really sure. But what we do know is that this star helped these men find Jerusalem. But Jerusalem isn't the final destination. So they come to the city to find out where this king has been born. And it says here that they have one main goal: to worship this newborn child. These are grown men. These are wise men, smart men, capable men. And they have come all this way to worship this young child. You know, it's interesting that when we typically think about these wise men, we think about the gifts that they gave. And certainly we read about them giving gifts, down in verse 11. But their main goal that day was to worship Jesus. They weren't just looking and searching for Jesus. They were looking for him so that they could worship him. Verse 3. Says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written of the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, and the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So King Herod hears about their search, and it says that he's troubled. Not only is he troubled, but Jerusalem is as well. There can only be one king, right? There's only one throne. There's only one crown. So who is this king that was born? They're wondering. King Herod and the people thought that King Herod was the king of the Jews. So what's going on with this baby that they're calling the king of the Jews? So the king gathers some teachers, some priests, to find out about this king being born. And they tell him it comes from this quote from the Old Testament, from the book of Micah. It says that a ruler will come from this small town of Bethlehem. But it will not be a typical ruler. It will be a king who shepherds the people of Israel. So this will not be a tyrant, a ruthless king. This will be a kind and giving shepherd. And of course, later we know that Jesus referred to himself as the good shepherd. So this ruler, this king, will come from the small town of Bethlehem. This was prophesied a long time ago in the Old Testament, that the king would come humbly in to the world. Today, if you visit the town of Bethlehem, you can go see the place where Jesus might have been born. We're not totally sure about the exact location in Bethlehem. But now there's a church on top of this potential site, and everybody goes to this church to see the place where Jesus might have been born. And to enter into this church, you have to go through this doorway, But this is not a typical doorway. It's actually a very tiny doorway. In other words, you can't just walk straight in or you would bump your head. You must crouch down, you must lower yourself to get through the door. And the idea is to humble yourself, just like Jesus did when he came into the world. Jesus, our King, was born in a manger. He didn't enter this world as some VIP, even though Jesus could have done just that. But Jesus came into this world as a servant, humbly born in the town of Bethlehem that was prophesied long ago. Jesus approached this world humbly, and we are called to approach God humbly as well. The good news of Jesus Christ should humble us when we recognize, how much we have sinned against God, and yet he still died for us so that we might be forgiven and to know God. This is amazing news. This is amazing grace. It's truly humbling. Nothing can satisfy our souls except for God. But God didn't hide from us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, born in Bethlehem, came into this world to be amongst us. Emmanuel, God with us. He was with the people then, and he is with us today. It's incredible news that God would humble himself and come down to this earth. But don't forget that he came to us in a town called Bethlehem, a small town, a town that's not really that special. And it's a reminder that he came down for you too. You might think you're not anything special. You might think you're just ordinary or maybe even less than ordinary. You might think, why would God want someone like me? But the truth is, God isn't looking for VIPs. In fact, people that think they are VIPs, like King Herod, usually miss out on God, right? When King Herod heard about Jesus' birth, he didn't rejoice like the wise men. He wasn't happy about it. Instead, he was troubled, it said, and wanted to know what was going on. God isn't looking for VIPs. God is looking for humble, ordinary people, people who come to him and confess their humble need for him. Verse 7. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found them, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." So Herod gets the wise men together and he begins to deceive them. Since these men came from out of town, perhaps they didn't know about King Herod's reputation. So maybe they thought, hey, this king is actually being sincere. So Herod sends them to find the child and bring the child back to them. Herod says the reason is so that he can worship this child like the wise men, but we'll see in a moment that's not true. Verse 9. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So the wise men leave and they're guided to Jesus by this star. Now remember, the distance between Jerusalem and Bethlehem is about 10 kilometers, so they're pretty close. And in verse 10, we see that they're excited, they're joyful as they begin to follow this star. You could say the star was leading them to Jesus, but of course God is in control of everything. God is in control of the cosmos. And for me, the star is a reminder that God can use all sorts of things to lead us to him. For the wise men, it was a star. But for us, it can be many different things. Or it could be a person in our life who told us about Jesus. It could be a father or mother who loved the Lord and was a great example for you. It could be a friend who invited you to church one day. Or it could be an event, right? God can use major events to get our attention, to lead us to him. It can be tragedy. It can be the death of a loved one. Or it can be a joyful moment. It can be the birth of a loved one. It could be a move, changing your location where you live. It could be a natural disaster. It could be a car accident. It could be a promotion at work. It could be a failed exam. God can use these things to get our attention to him, to help wake us up to reality again. This is why funerals are often just really powerful moments as people stop and consider life and death and what God wants from them. This is why the birth of a child can really shake up things too, because young parents start to wonder, how am I going to raise this child? What values should I teach? What should I teach them about God? God can use major events to get our attention. Remember the story of Jonah, right? God had called Jonah to go, but Jonah avoided God's call and got on this boat to escape. But then there was this huge storm. The people threw Jonah off the boat. He got swallowed by a big fish. And it was in the belly of that big fish that God got Jonah's attention. The storm was actually God's mercy to Jonah to get his attention. Don't miss the signs that God might be showing you right now. Don't miss out on the things that God might be using to wake you up and lead you to him. You might think it's, all of these different coincidences, but there are no coincidences with the Lord. And he might be trying to get your attention to call you back to himself. Don't miss the signs. And we see with the wise men, God is not trying to hide from us. He wants us to find him, right? He leads us to him. Don't ignore the signs. Don't ignore the star, let's say, in your life that God is using you to lead you to him. Instead, run after that star. Follow the signs. Listen and see. Have ears to hear and eyes to see, because as we will see in these last verses, when we seek the Lord with all of our heart, we will always find him. Verse 11. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So the wise men joyfully finally arrive at the house. They see Mary, they see Jesus. And what's the first thing they do? They worship. Again, Jesus is at this time is probably either 1 year old or maybe 2 years old by that point. And yet here are these wise, grown men worshiping this little child. You know, at the time, the wise men probably didn't know that this was indeed God in the flesh. But all of the events probably let them know, okay, this is not an average baby. They got the privilege to see Jesus at the beginning of his time on earth. We get the privilege of knowing the full story of who Jesus is and what he has done for us. But our responses should be the same. When we think about who Jesus is and what he's done in our lives, it should cause us to worship. You know, today we typically associate the word worship with singing. And of course, singing songs is an act of worship to God. But that's not all that worship is, right? Singing is one of the ways we worship God, but it's not the only way. We can worship God through prayer by confessing that he is the Lord of our lives, that he is worthy of all the glory and honor and praise. Worshiping the Lord is turning our hearts and attention and minds towards him. But we can also worship God with the way that we live our lives. When we love and serve others, when we forgive others, when we help people that are in need, when we encourage others, when we pray for other people. We can glorify God with our lips, but we can also glorify God with our lives. Look with me at Romans chapter 12, verse 1. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual act of worship. In other words, God doesn't just want your worship songs. God doesn't just want you to sing to him in worship. God wants you to worship him with your life. In other words, worship is a lifestyle. There is a way to live your life that brings honor and glory to God. It's the choices that you make when no one else is looking. It's the way that you treat other people. When we see the wise men in the story, we see them worship Jesus in verse 11. They fall down at their feet and they worship him. But they also worshiped him in verses 1 through 10, and they also worshiped him in verse 12. They made choices in their life to find Jesus. They followed the star. They followed the signs. They listened to God. Even in verse 12, we read that they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and they listened. They went back to their country in a different way. In other words, they didn't just worship God in verse 11. They worshiped the Lord in verses 1 through 10 and 12 as well, by the choices they made, by listening to God. The wise men should make us stop and consider our own worship to the Lord. Not just singing, but how we worship the Lord with our lives, with the choices that you make. Right? The wise men could have listened to other voices. They could have listened to King Herod. They could have compromised. But they didn't. They listened to God. Think back to some of the choices or decisions that you've made recently. In those choices, in those decisions, did you listen to God? Did you follow his leading? Did you pay attention to the signs? Or did you compromise? Did you try to take a shortcut? Did you know what you were supposed to do and yet decided to do it in a different way? We can try to do it in our own way, but do you really think that your way is better than God's way? It might seem okay in the short term. There might be some benefits in the short term, but in the long term, it never pays off. In the end, you're only cheating yourself. But if you have compromised, if you have done it your own way, God is not standing there just waiting to tell you, I told you so. No, our God is gracious and loving. And more than anything, he wants you to get back on the right path. Looking at the story of Jonas, right? We serve the God of second chances, of third chances, of fourth chances, and on and on and on. Don't just worship the Lord with your lips. Worship the Lord with your lives. The choices and decisions that you make. That's where true joy is. That's where true life is. I said earlier that we usually think about the wise men not as worshipers, but as gift givers. But giving gifts to the Lord is an act of worship as well. In this scene, the wise men brought Jesus gifts of gold, of frankincense, of myrrh. And it was typical back then to bring gifts if you were to meet a person of honor or a person of power. Now, there are some different interpretations about what those different gifts mean, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment during communion. But most likely, these were supplies and that were helpful for Mary and Joseph's escape to Egypt. Back then, they brought their gifts to Jesus, and today we continue to bring our gifts to Jesus as well. We give back to God our money, our time, our resources, as well as the spiritual gifts and talents that the Holy Spirit has given us. In other words, we give back to the one who has provided us all things. They did that back then, and we do that today as an act of thanksgiving and as an act of worship. Jesus said that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And we were reminded of that during this Christmas season. It's not about getting, it's about giving. True joy is not found in keeping or accumulating or hoarding. True joy is found in giving it all away. And Jesus came to earth and gave his life away for you. It's a free gift he offers all of us. All we have to do is believe it and receive it. And in response, we worship. You don't have to pay Jesus back. It's impossible to pay Jesus back, but we return to God in worship for the things that he has done. You know, I think in this story of the wise men, we see the full journey of the soul. In the beginning, we see the search, right? The wise men, they're looking for Jesus. In the same way, we are all searching for something in our lives in the beginning. Then God uses this star to help them find him. In the same way that God uses things in our lives to lead us to him. And then they find him. And it's a joyful moment. But that's not the end of the journey either. The fulfillment of the journey is worship. It is worshiping Jesus that ultimately satisfies our souls. A lot of things in our lives don't last forever. But worship lasts forever. As we approach this Christmas season, don't just pay attention to the gifts of the wise men. Pay attention to the worship. Let worship fill your hearts this season. Worship the Lord with your lips and worship the Lord with your life. Treasure the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Emmanuel, God with us. Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you for your word. God, we thank you for the story of the wise men. We thank you for how you led them as we are reminded how you lead us. God, we don't have probably for most of us a star to show us where to go. But God, you sovereignly use events, you use people to bring us to you. God, give us ears to hear and eyes to see. Let us not try to walk our own path or our own journey. But let us be faithful to your voice. Help us to listen. God, there's always a temptation to take things in our own hand, to do it our own way, to compromise, to try to do a shortcut. But God, in the end, we're only cheating ourselves because your ways are good. And you lead us to good places, Father. You are the good shepherd. So God, I pray for anyone watching or listening today who is looking at their life and they're still searching. They still haven't found what they're looking for. God, I pray that they would seek and find you, for it is you and you alone who satisfies our souls. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.